Hey there friend, are you stopping by? Let me show you how to make resin fly. Glitter swirls and colors that glow. Georgie's Gorgeous Gifts is the place to go.
Hi and welcome back to my channel. So this was my first attempt at trying to do an underwater scene. The reason it's so cloudy is that I haven't finished sanding it yet, but this is what my second attempt was. So this is what we're going to be making today. Now the difference between the first one and the second one, as you can see, is this one is a cube and you obviously pour from the top, and that's not an issue. With this one, the detail for the water is actually on the top here. So if you want it so that it's standing upright like that, you've literally got to pour it like that. So what I had to do was pop it inside the casing, the housing, and then I literally had to stand it upright and pop some sellotape across the front of it, and then do it in shallow pours. So my issue was with that is that I should have done it on the non-sticky side, because the sand and then the little bits stuck to the sellotape essentially. And although you can't very slightly see where the sellotape was, you can still see it, and that's the bit I'm not happy with. Yeah, it's and for some reason this bit here had kinked. As you can see there, it's kinked, and there wasn't enough weight to hold it down. So this one was a learning curve, it certainly was, and I will attempt it because I wanted this water look on the top, but I figured out a better way of doing it in these blocks. So I ordered a set of blocks and thought, no, that's too small, that's too small, that's too small. So I thought, no, there's no way 10 centimetres. That's good, that's about right. So I'd already ordered this one, and then I ordered a pack. So there was a few smaller ones and these all stacked inside. And then came this one. Now this is the 10 centimetres, which is way too big, but I'm not very good with sizes, as you've seen in other videos. But yeah, I do want to do a bigger one, but I didn't want to be going straight for the 10 centimetre and creating the water effect on the top, because I'd never tried that before, and it's a lot of resin to waste if it's in that. So I went for the 6 centimetre. So yeah, that's just a bit of backstory to how this came about. This is all resin. I didn't use any air dry clay at all for this one. It was all just made out of resin and sand. So I wanted to be a bit more adventurous. And the other thing is, you can see the one line there. Now I know, in order to not get these lines, you've got to pour before it's fully cured, and I fell asleep because I was working through the night, and when I woke up the following morning, it had fully cured. The other issue I had is that I wanted to do it so that the shark or the whale or whatever was coming out of the water. Now, because this had the housing and it's too flimsy without the housing, there was no way of doing that without drilling into it. So yeah, I had to find a way of creating the water effect myself, which is why I've gone for the cube. And this is how I done it. As I've said, the last one was completely made out of resin, but I'd been watching some amazing makes made out of clay recently, mainly from Johnny at Johnny Dark Arts and Gert from Gert Creates. The things they do with polymer clay, and it is just absolutely amazing. So I will link both of their channels in the description. So thanks for the inspiration for this. So I've got these set of moulds, and they are mountainy type scene moulds. So I wanted to make some rocks to go in the underwater scene. So I'm just using some air dry clay just to pop into these moulds. I was unsure which ones I wanted, so I just made them all. So to harden this stuff, it is exactly as it says on the tin, it's air dry clay. So I left a set of them to go completely hard, but the shape itself was a little too basic to look like rocks. So I also made a set that I just wanted to mould the shape. So I left it about 3 or 4 hours, so it took its shape, but it was still soft and pliable. I've worked with air dry clay to make moulds, but nothing like this. I've never made models out of it, and I've never, done anything like this before. So this is a first for me. So I'm going to speed this bit up for you.
Hit that subscribe, hit that like. Let's craft the day and light the night. Georgie's gorgeous gifts run by Tony, it's true. We're making magic just for you. One click away, it's all right here. Creativity's calling loud and clear.
So these have been in the mould for a good few hours, so I decided to take them out while they were still soft. The reason I did this was because I didn't want it to be quite a defined peak. Because I wanted these as rocks, I wanted them to have that sort of rock texture to it. One thing I did find out is that you can use these moulds both sides, so inside out technically, from the bottom or from the top, and as long as you're really, really careful, it was okay trying to pull them out while they were still soft. So to get the rocky texture that I needed, I'd already got the shape. So I did this by just literally popping little grooves, little dots, little marks, and trying to make it look more like underwater rocks. Again, like I've said, this is the first time I've ever done any kind of modelling with any kind of clay. Now, I did have a few issues with this because the first couple of times I tried to do it, it started to lose its definition because it was still too soft. So I had to wait to the right moment and continue to do it till it was at that place where, it wasn't going back to its original shape. But yeah, this did take a while to get this how I wanted. I mean, honestly, Johnny and Gert just make it look so easy. And yeah, modelling with clay just really isn't. But it was quite therapeutic. I really enjoyed it. So to add further detail to it, I decided that I wanted to put little fish or little holes in the rock, like fish pools. So I'm just getting my dotting tool or my silicone stick and just making little circular motions inside the clay. I mean, even I was quite impressed with how they were starting to look. I mean, I'm not getting carried away and I'm not going to become some master sculptor with clay overnight. But yeah, I was quite chuffed with it. That's a word I haven't used in a while. So I just continued to make little grooves and marks to make these look more realistic. Then it was time to pop the first layer of resin into the mould. So I just got some aquatic sand off Amazon, poured that into a little cup and added my resin. When working with sand, you need to make sure that the sand to resin ratio is very much more sand than there is resin. Otherwise you end up with a clear layer where the sand sinks to the bottom and the resin then sits on the top, and that's not what I wanted. So I'm putting a good chunk of sand, and you can see it's really, really quite thick. I mean, it's even quite difficult to get out of the cup, but that's perfect because that means it's not going to get that horrible clear layer. So I'm just moving it all out to the edges. When doing these cube moulds and you're doing it in layers, I often find that the areas that the bubbles gather is around the edge where the two layers meet. So because this was just a base layer, I just tried to get it as flat as I could. So I used my stick for this. And you can really see how thick it is. Again, when you're working with dry items, it doesn't matter how much you put in the resin, it will always cure. So sand, glitter, and I've said this in videos before, there is no ratio rule when it comes to adding dry elements to your epoxy resin. It's only when adding liquid that it makes a difference. So I left this to cure for a good 5 or 6 hours. In the meantime, these are now solid. They've been sitting for about 3 or 4 days, allowing them to dry. So I'm using normal acrylic paints to decorate them. So you can see I'm just using one of my old resin pieces. I've popped a few different colours that I know I'm going to use onto it. And now we're just going to paint these clay pieces. Like I keep saying, this whole process was completely new to me. I never thought I was any good at making models or clay, or turns out I'm not actually that bad. So I've used a mixture of black and white because I didn't have any grey paint, and I'm just putting a base coat onto this these rocks. I do use various different colour shades of the grey, so I mix up different amounts of white and black together just to give that variation in colour, as not all rocks are all one colour, perfectly uniformed. So I'm using a tiny little paintbrush for this, just to make sure that I'm getting in all them little extra grooves and gaps, and just trying my best to give it a really detailed rocky look. So now that the first layer is dry, I'm just going in with the darker grey. I'm concentrating on the deeper bits where it would naturally be darker. Now, while I was making these little rocks, I also made a few little bits, like little underwater anemones, and I made this cute little octopus. This is the bigger one. I did make a smaller one, and then like little underwater bits. I didn't know whether I was going to use them, but I made them just in case because I was really enjoying playing with the clay, and these were the little extra bits left. So after giving them a coat of the colour that they should be, I'm just adding some little fake moss into the top of the round coral I've made. So I wanted these rocks to have a little bit more something to them, to look a bit more realistic. So I started off by painting some little green areas onto the rocks to look like moss. And then I thought, actually, I've got some fake moss that I've used previously, so let's pop that on there. So that's what I do. So I get some little fake moss and pop that onto the rocks just to make it look a little bit more realistic. I stick this all down with UV resin. I know I should be wearing my gloves, but I was doing 10 things all at once for this piece. So it was just a nightmare to try and keep them on. And you can still see my fingers are red from the paint. So I ended up getting a little paintbrush to pop the UV resin onto both of these pieces so that I could attach them. And because this was the first time I'd ever done anything like this, I wasn't sure whether the red paint was actually going to bleed into the resin and come off the air dry clay. So I decided to coat everything that was going in UV resin. I didn't do that to the rocks, but I did do it to all the little bits that I was going to pop into this piece. So now these are actually starting to look like realistic underwater rocks. And it was time for the next layer of resin. So again, I just needed a thin layer. So I popped some dry sand onto the top of this piece that wasn't quite cured. And the reason I wanted the next layer was so that I could pop the rocks into it and they would actually sit and set into the sand. But it already had a solid base, so it wasn't going to go all the way through. So because I could see in this lot that there still wasn't quite enough sand in there and I was going to get that dirty clear layer around the rocks, I'm just adding some more dry sand and mixing that in. You can see the layer really is quite thin. So I'm just making sure that all that dry sand has got resin on it. It literally is thick and gloopy, perfect for what I need. And then it was time to pop the pieces that I'd made into it. But you can see here I've popped this tiny little plastic fish, I've got a bag of them, into the little hole, and I filled the hole with UV resin so that I wasn't going to get any bubbles coming from that hole. So I'm just pressing this rock into the sand and trying to push it into the corner as far as it'll go. And then I popped all the other little bits in. So I popped in the round coral that I'd made, and then I did try to pop the little octopus into it, but it just didn't look right. It wouldn't have been in proportion to the whale once I'd put that where I wanted it. It would have made it look like the octopus was half the size of the whale, and that really would have done my head in. So I've just got a pair of tweezers and I'm popping some little shells in front of this rock. I ended up putting about 3 or 4 in, just to give it that underwater scene, base of the ocean look. So as you can see here, I changed my mind on the octopus and took it back out again. So it was time for the next layer of resin. So for this, I literally put 2 drops of blue pigment into the resin and then popped it into this cube. I wanted it to come above the rock, but only just. The only problem with doing it this way is that you can't really tell on the gradient of your colour as you're coming up the piece. So I had to roughly guess. So I should have really started with 2 drops, 1 drop, and then a tiny bit on my stick for the 3 layers. That way I would have known that they were in the right order of gradient. So I'm just popping in my next layer. So you can see it's just slightly tinted, and because of the mould itself, you can't really tell how transparent the piece is either. So those are the things that I found a little bit difficult. Well, I wanted this one not to have a defined straight look, so I did tilt this, and while it was semi-curing, I kept it tilted. So I just popped a little bottle underneath it, just so that when you looked at the piece, it didn't look like defined blocks of colour, purely because I didn't know how varied the colour was going to be. And then I left this tilted for about 5 or 6 hours, just so that it was semi-cured before I popped the next layer on. So for this next layer, I didn't know what colour I wanted it to be, because I wanted the gradual difference in colour, but I wanted it to be like a greeny kind of blue in order to put the whale into. So I'm just testing out 3 different colours. So I've got Lake, Cayenne and the blue, I think it is. And I'm just popping them into a little bit of resin into these tiny cups, just so I can see what colour they are to know what best to pop into this next layer. So after trying out all 3 colours in a little bit of resin, I finally decided that I was going to use this Cayenne blue. Am I saying that right? And I think it was the right colour. So I've mixed some into my resin, literally a couple of drops. You can see there is a slant on this resin, which is what I wanted. And I'm just pouring the resin in ever so slowly before I leave that to sort of semi-cure, before I pop the whale into it. Now when popping the whale in, I didn't know whether I wanted him coming in or jumping out of the water. So I decided on him jumping in the water. But I thought, how am I going to keep him like that? So I waited until this layer of resin was, I'd say, a good two hours in, and placed the whale into the, not cured resin, but soft resin, halfway. Just so it wasn't going into uncured resin and going to be flopping about everywhere. So this is now ready for the last layer. And you can see there's a lot of movement still on this whale. So I did try topping it up with bottles, trying to keep him upright that way. I ended up tying a piece of string to his tail and tying the other end around my camera stand that I used to do the overhead filming with. You can see I attempted all sorts. How I thought this was going to work, I do not know. I mean, look at this. Honestly, it was so difficult. But yeah, so I ended up tying his tail off and securing it that way. So this had been sort of semi-curing again, the last layer, and I wanted to do like water ripples coming from his body. But this didn't work because I'd done it way too soon, and it ended up going back completely flat because the resin just hadn't been curing long enough. And bearing in mind there's 5 layers on this cube, and it all had to be done in one day because I couldn't allow any layer to fully cure, because that was the only way I wasn't going to get those defined lines throughout the piece that would have driven me mental. So now it was time to demould this piece. I was quite scared actually. So I literally grabbed it round the edges and pulled it so far, held that with my hands, did the same all the way around, and literally just rolled it out. At this point I was super excited because it had actually worked. The whale looked like it was diving in the water. Let me know if I should have done it the other way, so he was diving out of the water. So I was really, really pleased with how this had come out. And now it was time to do the water effect on the top. Now, when Just For You Online was still Just For You Online, I ordered some of this water effect type paste, and only ever really used it on a coaster to test it out. And I've also got a similar product from, it's a company that deals with models. But you can see here the gradient wasn't too bad, but it went from light to dark to light again, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted it dark going to lighter. So anyway, now I want to do waves on the top of this piece. I mean, this stuff is just absolutely amazing. So the idea is that you build it up in stages, leave it to cure. So I'm painting it on with a paintbrush, and I'm just trying to give it some detail, more so around his body, and then I make like little waves. Now this took probably a good 4 days to do, because I did 5 or 6 layers to build up the waves to how I wanted them. But honestly, how I haven't figured this product out and used it for more, I really don't know, because the effect that it gives, and it just looks like realistic water. So I will speed this up for you, because as I said, it was a good few days, but watch the process. It's magical, honestly. I mean, this is 16 times sped up. So yeah, you can tell how much time it took.
Bubbles rise, the currents hum, every pore a beating drum, realistic beauty, it has begun. Under the sea, dreams take flight, Georgie's gorgeous gift shining bright, Tony's hands bring the magic alive, underwater dreams where art survives.
I'm now adding some blue ink to the paste and adding that to the waves. So in order to try and make this a bit more realistic, I've added some white pigment paste to it, and I'm going to go in now like the foam of the waves. You can see why this took days, because every layer I had to wait until it was fully cured. This water effect stuff is just absolutely amazing. So this is nearly finished, and I'm going to leave you with some glamour shots. I hope you've enjoyed my video. So I've been Tony from Georgie's Gorgeous Gifts. Stay safe, happy crafting, and bye for now.
Crafting worlds where life is drawn. Blue pours deep like a quiet song. Layers build, the ocean grows. A whale leaps where the sunlight glows. Under the sea, dreams take flight, Georgie's gorgeous gift shine.